Okay, hi everybody. Welcome to a new Gimbalabs Playground session from Gimbalabs and Friends. Today we have a really wonderful invite. Eystein Hansen. He's a really well-known Cardano member and he's deep into these governance works that are taking place currently today in the ecosystem. So this is Gimbalabs Playground. Today I'm hosting this session and taking the place temporarily of the place of James. And okay, in general, we have this is our calendar, general calendar, where the where people that have some kind of project or idea or some kind of work that they want to share with the Cardano community, the world in general, they can come here and talk with us, share the work that they are doing. Today, this is all the list of our all the projects in general. Today, May 28th, we have Einstein in the scenario with the topic socially upgradable smart contracts. Very interesting because I think it's a combination between the theory, the Voltaire and governance theory with some technical issues that can put in practice all this governance conversation at a community level. So, welcome, Einstein, and the stage is yours.
Yeah, thank you, Sebastian, and it's great to talk about this topic. Let me start with the why. Why should we have upgradable smart contracts? It's upgradable to social means. Why just not make new smart, for example? Well, if you think about it, smart contracts usually tends to lock up assets in some form of way. And it's not really then always easy to move them from one contract to another. And I guess an example would be a DAO doing treasury distributions and having projects in the middle of such distributions, and then finding a hack that could drain the treasury over time. Does this sound familiar? This is actually the DAO hack, the original DAO of Ethereum. So wouldn't it have been nice back then if they could actually then, through social consensus, where, for example, 95% of the people who used this DAO agreed that we need to change the smart contract so it's not vulnerable to hack or a loophole that could potentially drain the treasury over time. But when you do this, I want to also offer the other side of this debate is like, you actually then violate this principle of can't do evil. Because the moment you allow a contract to be socially upgraded, you open up for that. So you need to be really careful about the governance of such, I call it appealability. Appealing, meaning that you are able to correctify or appeal to the smart contract in some way to then adjust it. But how can you solve this in some neutral ways? One thing you can do is to limit the scoping of the social upgradable part. Like it could be segments of the smart contract, so that the can't do evil is isolated very much. The other thing you could do is actually what's called decentralized justice. And I'm sorry if I bring up a lot of different concepts there at one time, but these are all connected in some way. So what you could do, for example, a smart contract with a treasury distribution, let's say that there's one person who distributes from the treasury and another person receives a grant, and they are trying to agree upon if a project has been delivered or not, and they're not really agreeing on that. And the smart contract waits for this agreement, and the resources are locked, so liquidity is not being used in a good way. Well, what you could do then, you could appeal to like a decentralized arbitration system, where you could have people who through stake were selected to form an opinion, let's say reviewers or people who have done these type of projects in the past, and they could actually then vote on this, and whoever voted the majority could get a reward, while the people who voted wrongly would actually not receive a reward. It's a paper called Decentralized Justice, by the way. And that's one way of doing it, this appealability. Another one is through having some form of internal vote. You could have, for example, our organization at Gimbalabs could be like the higher hierarchy doing a budget, and then you can have smaller budgets for different working groups inside the smart contract. And then actually the one working group that's disagreeing on their portion of the budget that's supposed to be unlocked in the smart contract could forward that or appeal that to a higher order, like for example the Gimbalab main organization, and they could make a voting on this, or could simply do majority voting, for example. So this concept of appealability is something you need to think about and consider how to code. And then one final reason to why is this concept of harmonizing between code and law. And I use the term law here widely. Eric Alston writes about like how you can compare Bitcoin to having some constitutional properties by the way it's designed. And I use the term in that way, like properties or social contracts, what we have agreed to. An example of a social contract is what happened during the Ethereum split. Like some people had a social contract that the blockchain should be immutable. So when this DAO hack happened and they split, so some split over to Ethereum Classic because they had not agreed to part ways with this social contract, right? And others thought it was more important to make sure that the hacker did not get away with the funds, so they amended their own social contract. That's actually the example of appealing to the social side of the contract. But as you can see, there will always be this interplay between the social contract and the on-chain code. And really, if you want to create the least friction and the most efficient governance system of a blockchain, you need to have this form, like this sense of appealability. So the question becomes not if can't do evil, because actually the moment you introduce a treasury system to a blockchain, you can do evil because you're redistributing resources. It's more about how do we limit this, the effects of can do evil with appealability. And it's also has some very nice properties in that's positive. For example, let's imagine a contract that's stalled, that has no agreement. You could, for example, introduce like this form of heartbeat check, where people will have to vote on the contract to continue or actually redistribute all funds. And that will be another way of doing it. Like you're not only upgrading it, but you have to also keep verifying that you want to continue using it the way it's currently being used. And that's also part of this and a very powerful thing. That was what we discussed in Toulouse in the Builderfest, like this sort of heartbeat concept for governance inside a blockchain smart contract. But anyways, that's the wider part of this. Let me know your thinking, and I could try to detail any of the things if you found it interesting or something you want to explore further. But that's like the very high level of it.
Eystein, I'm wondering if you could kind of elucidate, flesh out more this idea of penalizing evil.
Yeah. So okay. So it becomes really important when you open up in a blockchain for doing evil. Basically, the moment something has human interaction that can change the rules or the code, you are introducing this. So what we discussed in Toulouse to limit this is you set up checks and balances throughout layers of a smart contract. Let's say organizations like, let's assume Intersect or Gimbalabs had smart contracts controlling a budget distribution. Well, if one working group can do evil and do some mismanagement of their budget, they are controlled by the next layer. So maybe it's a committee or someone who could then vote or change the course of action that was suggested by the working group under them. And then you put all these layers so you have accountability the whole way. And then it becomes more robust because all of the layers have to fail before the whole system fails itself. But of course, the top layers could potentially, if you design it that it's hierarchy only, then that could be a vulnerable spot for Canto Evil. And I'm very hesitant to introduce like penalties in form of resource capture from others, because I feel its essence of Cardano is this fact that we have a property right where we accept that Cardano ADA is your own. You will never be slashed from it. You will not. We always try to encourage positive behavior instead of penalizing bad behavior by taking resources. So that is why I want it to be in the social enforceable way. Just for example, with staking pools, we shame them. They are double producing blocks. It doesn't damage the blockchain because it's sort of, but it may create hard forks. But the Ouroboros protocol chugs along just fine. But these are only 5 times this has happened because they were socially shamed the moment they did this. Through, for example, tools like Pool Tool, etc. You could imagine the same in a smart contract. Again, using this example of a budget smart contract, you could, if someone misbehaved, give them some form of reputation score or some form of like publishing what they have done. And as long as it's transparent, I think that's the key for how you handle this. And that brings another question, like, what type of rules should always have this appealability? Does it make sense to all types of smart contracts? And to that question, I will say no, it does not. Because again, we have to really carefully consider what are the potential damages of opening up for this possibility. Go ahead, Steve.
I was wondering if you or maybe Adrian might know, are any of these new functions in Plutus version 3 going to make it easier to do what you're suggesting with the social?
I haven't checked too much Bluetooth version 3 because the Sancho testnet is a bit under construction, so it often is re-rolled. But I think it can be possible that there are some functions that make it easier.
Yeah, I'm not deeply into Plutus smart contracts, and I'm barely trying to learn IK myself. I'm more of the theoretical guy and staking pool operator. But it's certainly technically possible to make a smart contract that has the possibility to vote on some action inside its code and select a fork of the different code depending on how the vote goes by. I can imagine that should be possible. So I think it's technically possible, but please correct me if I'm wrong. But I believe Gimbalabs have been working on something similar like this. Like this is a concept that's not entirely unfamiliar to Gimbalabs.
Yeah, we go ahead. Go ahead.
Oh, no, please go ahead. Go ahead. Yes. No problem.
Well, I think we're both going to say the same thing. Yeah, I mean, Mix Ali has written a suite of contracts called Gladiator, and he did as much as he could, and it was like more interlocking smart contracts for decision making and disbursement of funds. And that, you know, like he really wanted to stop and see what kind of new functions were coming in with Plutus v3 before he worked on it anymore. The last time I spoke with him, I don't know what he's been doing lately. I think he's working more with Equivol.
Yeah, the to-dos I shared with Einstein a little bit, or in this on the surface, details about the smart contracts, Gladiator, the system that Mix created, and it's really complex. I don't have all the details. Maybe Adrian can. He has many more details about it. But my take is the more social complexity, the more smart contracts you need to ensure some kind of security and integrity on the code or on the system. That's my initial reflection. More smart contract, for example. I'm sure that I'm not wrong if I said that the smart contract Gladiator system is a compendium of 40 smart contracts. I don't know if I'm right, Adrian. But it's several contracts representing several layers of taking decisions, where people have to take decisions and ensure the integrity of those decisions. Okay, that's it.
Yes, the smart contract Gladiator, smart contracts are thought to be some of the finance for different other smart contracts.
I really like the name Gladiator. It symbolizes something I believe could be a role for smart contracts in governance. And that is the one of sort of like fighting through all of the massive amounts of data. One of the things I've been thinking about is like this concept of human speed governance. And that is due to the revolution we're going to have now with AIs and how much they're able to do and create data, also governance data on the blockchain. You need to have smart contracts that can automate some of the responses for governance. This could be to judge if something is constitutional. Maybe sometimes it's super simple, like, for example, proposing that a blockchain should have 0 block size. That should probably be unconstitutional because it totally destroys the liveliness of the blockchain. It's a given. And you can save a lot of time for whoever's going to do this if you can do this type of filtering and do this type of automated governance action. But we sometimes will get it wrong. So smart contracts needs to be able to be upgradable so that we can adjust and fine tune this. And in cases of uncertainty, it should just pass it over to the human layer again. And this is something, again, I think Cardano is at the forefront of, is this thinking of having this human layer and this programmable layer and how they interact. And we see this with having in the CIPS 1694, with how we create a system of DRAPs, CCC, and the SPOs, and how they will interact with off-chain rules, basically constitution, and all of the rules will set through MBOs and things like that. Well, that needs sometimes on-chain counterpart, and that role could be filled by smart contracts who have someone's understanding of some of the rules, and they need to be appealable so that humans, again, that the human layer has control and that these two are in harmony. That's what they call harmonizing law and code. And if we do that, we create a governance system that's unlike anything before it. So it's a really powerful thing. And this is, by the way, not something totally new. Like, there's a great article, Rules as Code, a journal paper, that's suggesting like this is something nation states could be applying. And if you get it right from the beginning and design with making it machine readable from the start, making sure that there's mechanisms to harmonize these two things so it's appealable both on the smart contract side and the human layer side, then they have something that's unprecedented. Like, it will revolutionize how we do law because it's so much more effective. Like, And we will need that, because when AI will be many of the entities doing things on the blockchain, they will do things at a volume and a speed and amount that's unprecedented from what we have now. So I also see blockchain as a potential guardian of that, to make sure it's still human enforceable and still human understandable, more importantly. And the smart upgradable contracts fits into this space as well, because that's what makes sure you still have the human element there. That's what makes sure that you have control as humans. Sorry, a bit rant on that one, but
no. I like it. I like it. You know, I was born in 1960, so there's a little bit of a baby boomer in me. You know, so that it's disappointing that we still need humans, but you know, at the same time, I don't trust AI either. So you know, like I can't be happy. You know, is what I'm saying.
So yeah, my background is psychology and law, and I would say my heart is in psychology, because I always think there's a human element to. As long as there's humans involved in the system, there will always be a human element to it. So the question is like, how do we ensure that we don't encourage or enable the bad side of human behavior? So that is why I started with this other side of the coin, like that you actually open up to can do evil instead of can't do evil, because that's usually the most major argument of the proposers, that says that code as or law as written in the code, and that the code should never be changed, because that's infallible to humans, because you then know exactly what you will get. It's not up to interpretation. But the problem with that is like, there will always be interpretation. There will always be mistakes. Even let's just take any type of smart contract as an example. Like there's a reason why in law you have amendments to almost all contracts humans make, and you don't really see that on smart contracts yet. But imagine when you start to use smart contracts to fill out work requirements, and like more subjective terms, like for example, good enough. Like what's good enough? Like what's an adequate fulfillment of a task in a smart contract? You can't do that without subject interpretation between humans. So again, there will always be a human elements, even when you have smart contracts. The moment you start to use smart contracts for human interaction.
I do agree with you. I think that possibility that somebody can do evil is what motivates people to be involved. You know, I just my psychology. You know, like
that's what
somebody
we need to solve.
Yeah.
And it sounds like the gladiator concept is trying to solve this by this layered approach, where you have 40 different smart contracts that's dependent on each other. So you have these different layers of safety in terms of this can't do evil. And yeah, if you also then add this concept of the heartbeat, where you actually have to check in. So basically you can't do evil by inaction or by actually a team leaving. That's really part of decentralization, right? People come and go and join anonymously. It's permissionless. So actually you kind of need this like concept of the heartbeat in some of these smart contracts to be able to unlock phones that might reside there forever if a team leaves and there's things inside it. I think Ergo is an example of this. They don't have a heartbeat. It's a proof of work chain where actually, if phones are inactive for a certain amount of time, it actually returns to the protocol. But you can easily imagine a smart contract having some form of rules for activity and then returning resources if there's no activity within a certain time, for example. And
I don't know if they take it, but they definitely threaten to take some money from your wallet if you don't move it around. I got that warning a couple of months ago. So.
Oh really?
Yeah.
Yeah, you are? Sorry. Jonathan?
Kajan.
Was that on Ergo, Steve?
Yeah.
Oh, interesting. What you were talking about, Eystein, was reminding me just of the native scripts within our multi-sig on Cardano, you can just put in time locks for your wallet. So, after you have to have a quorum of signatories within the time period, but then after that time period, any one of those could then sign transactions for that wallet. And those sorts of mechanisms are, the positive minded, stay engaged, but ultimately there is a way to access the funds. They're not going to be locked up forever.
Yeah, that's a good example of it. But like, what if all of the key holders left or dead or whatever, and the resources remain static forever for all eternity? Like, sometimes it's good to have this like general heartbeat test and not only a time lock to the specific keys that are capable to that smart contract or whatever interaction. And yeah, it depends. You could have like layered smart contract as the Gladiator approach Gimbalabs is doing. So you have this time locked, but maybe if nobody reacts there, this smart contract could be dependent on another smart contract, and that smart contract could say, yes, we want to unlock these resources, and $2 smart contract, and they will accept it as a valid signature as well, because maybe one of the keys in this other smart contract is actually part of that valid set of keys, as an example.
One of the things that makes me think of is there is a distinction between the or should there be, and is it necessary to have a distinction between governance tokens and utility tokens? Because if you think of like tokens getting locked up indefinitely, like we see in Bitcoin, for example, that represents a degree of loss in the Bitcoin ecosystem in terms of there are fewer tokens around, but that just increases the value per token. So in fact, if a treasury gets lost or locked or signed away forever, everybody gets richer who's not involved in that part of the treasury. So it's kind of a deflationary mechanism within the blockchain itself. Whereas with governance, you kind of need to have a different approach, a different attitude, where actual loss of voting rights does not necessarily improve the ability to make wise decisions, in the rest of the chain.
That's a great point. Like, you ask yourself, like, when is this like appealability necessarily? And as you said, some counter arguments for it for non-tokens, because value of everyone else goes up. But like, you could also argue that for the people involved, it doesn't create like what you could say like velocity of currency, because some currency will be locked up instead of could have been used in the treasury or could have been put to active use back in the clinic. So there's a pros and cons to that, but I tend to agree with you. I tend to think that maybe that is not the typical scenario for it, and it's more this like governance actions that are related to budgets. This would fit very well with, for example. And when you have automation of judging governance actions or social contracts, then I think this would fit very well into that. And maybe that should be a governance token. I think you brought up a very valid point there. Yeah.
There's also, I mean, like there's a huge level of assumption that Satoshi's a good guy, right? I mean, what happens when Bitcoin gets to $5 or $10 million, and all of a sudden he pops up and says, I'm gonna buy Botswana or something like that. It's.
Yeah,
I'm just saying, like you don't know until you know, and with this, you'll never know. Somebody could always pop up with that.
I think that's the key for governance smart contracts is appealability and transparency in doing it. Or actually, I will say there's a few. This is, by the way, from Rules as Code article. You need transparency, traceability, accountability, what's called appropriateness. That means like you choose to use this concept only when it's appropriate. And we just discussed now, like maybe sometimes it's not appropriate to do this. And you need to have the rules should be very clearly and machine readable and available and interoperable, so it can interact with the rest of the blockchain, and secure, so it's been through some form of audit. And if you have all of these things, it's harder to need, or you don't really need to do this like trust in a person. You can actually trust in and see it on the chain how it will work, and you can know in advance, okay, I accept these smart contracts because in this case the appealability is through 4 different security layers of governance, or it requires a 95% majority, or whatever. You know the rules in advance because you should be able to read them in advance. That's an important property of doing this type of smart contracts. You need to make sure they're traceable and transparent and open so everyone can audit them, or else you should probably not bother to do this.
So yeah, so let me try my question. It has to do with reputation. How do you see reputation being part of a smart contract, and how can that be implemented technically? And you know, social mechanisms like that, or also shaming, public shaming, which is something that is very important in this ecosystem. Everybody has the opportunity to do anything they want. But don't, you know, but eventually there will be a price for that, if I can tell you like that.
So there's a lot of things we need to discuss here when it comes to reputation. And I will start with something that's kind of missing currently, is ecosystem mapping. So the whole ecosystem needs to be aware of where are the different actors and what actions are they taking. Because if not, it's kind of hard to be held accountable. Because if you can just leave from one platform to the next, you can just restart again and again your reputation, and you can do bad with your reputation. Other way is over time, the cost of reputation will be higher in a permissionless system because you start to build up trust, and it's sort of hard to leave that again. But that opens up for what's called a long range attack, where you build up the trust until you do one deadly strike and do something terrible. But there are some models where you can sort of have a temporary penalty on your reputation based on current actions, but it sort of heals back or regrows over time. That sort of helps versus this like more long range attack. But I would say in general, how I envision reputation is that we need to make sure it's spread across the whole ecosystem, not just one platform. We need to have some form of mechanism to start to map out the ecosystem and then connect these different actions. So I'm not a believer in zero knowledge proofs and connecting identity being the solutions for all type of reputations. I believe we can do some of this in a more permissionless nature. I believe for and this was one of the debates we had about the DRAP workshop, because DRAP will be able to do quite bad things if they vote through things. They could, for example, change security protocol parameters, and they can do that without having 51% of the protocol value because they are delegated to. So for those type of situations, I strongly believe we should have identity and maybe using zero knowledge proof to tie up to reputation. But the more you move away from the very critical parts of the security of the ecosystem, the more I believe we should have like this reputation system that's just connected to an address and tied to all of the activity across the ecosystem on different platforms, and building up a reputation there. So that's my high level thinking about that. In a smart contract on governance system, how should it be? It depends. I talked this about like a jury or like some form of arbitration where someone disagree on something, but they both agree that we can take this to a third party organ or a third party or group of people to judge on something. That way you sort of go away from the reputation system and actually can trust people in a trustless manner, because you know if something fails, you can actually have this arbitration. That sort of removes the need for that reputation in those cases. But that again requires then that this jury is highly incentivized to do something correctly, and maybe they need a reputation system. So yeah, you sort of can't get without that. I would recommend Mihail Uleru. She has written a lot about different reputation systems. She worked with the US Army early days about reputation system, and she made like an overview article of the different types of reputation system that exist out there. But I think we have really not solved this problem completely yet. And my best answer to that is like, for high level security things, because of this potential overriding of the 51% attack, you'd sort of need to have an identity system connected to a reputation system, or else you are risking the whole protocol safety. For things that are, for example, isolated to a treasury distribution, Catalyst is a good example of that. Reputation system built around a Cardano address is sufficient, plenty sufficient. But what you need is this component of mapping the ecosystem, having a platform you can log on to see what has the activity been of this person, not just on Catalyst, but in all other types of situations.
Right. How do you see how many challenges or how challenging it is to bring a smart contract upgradable, and yeah, to describe it, because I see that smart contract needs to happen in before the chain, right? They cannot be on the chain. So how do you perceive, or how do you perceive the upgradability of a smart contract?
Yeah, it's sort of also a question about like, what do you keep on chain and versus off chain? So you could, for example, imagine a smart contract depending on some off-chain data, or even verified through an oracle, and that off-chain part could be upgradable. I don't recommend that, because that would violate this transparency and traceability that I just talked about. I believe it should be on the blockchain itself, the code that should be upgraded, and it should be in a visible process. So the smart contract needs to have a written process of how it is going to upgrade, and how resources will be, for example, transferred if it's upgrading to a version 2 of a smart contract or whatever. So everything is clear in advance on how you do that. Is this hard? Yes, I don't think many have tried it this way before. Could it fail? Absolutely. This is something like I would love to experiment with, and I would love to hear what Gimbalabs have in experience on this. And for me, it's still at a very like theoretical level how I'm discussing it, and we need to test this in the practicality of it. But I envision it based on these properties, that it should be not an off-chain part of that the smart contract interacts with, but actually an on-chain part, and you show the process as part of the on-chain smart contract itself. That would be the ideal scenario.
Got it.
So we as Gimbalabs already have experimented with that, especially in the Andamio smart contracts. But we facing more the problem of governance. So who should be able to do some updates to a protocol or to smart contracts? So just creating dynamic smart contracts where you can change some parameters or even move to a new address isn't that complicated. It is complicated, but not too hard. It's more the aspect who should be able to do that. So what voting mechanism or something like that?
Yeah, so an example of that in SIP 1694 is that we have like this tri-party system with the CC being able to actually block some form of governance actions. And you could argue that they could potentially in the future create new case law by their actions. So by their on-chain actions and how they actually vote. You could easily imagine something similar in a smart contract where you have an organization and you hold each other accountable. So like maybe you have a top level, let's say the Gimbalab leading circle can actually vote something through, but if they get no confidence from all of their members of that smart contract or treasury distribution or whatever, then they actually have to make a new election and put new people in there. And again, you make that visible in the contract itself, and then it's possible. The moment you depend on a single party for governance, you are usually in trouble, because power usually tends to corrupt over time and humans are fallible. So you need to have some form of checks and balance in any type of governance system, even if inside a smart contract for a social upgradable smart contract. So that's my main thinking about it, but we need to make it as simple as possible. Like, don't start with super complex governance structures in a smart contract. Like, that will get very hard very quickly, I suspect. But yeah, if you have an interchangeable smart contracts, you have like working groups, they have a treasury, and that's from one segment of a smart contract. Well, they then depend on a vote from a higher level, and they are checked in balance by a leading level, but that leading level can also be rejected if 95%, for example, votes against them. Then you have checks and balances, and you have a governance system for the smart contract. But how the fine-tuning it totally needs to be tested, it's very fine and there to talk about this thing, but as I've experienced working on other governance stuff, the truth is sort of in the pudding. Like, you need to test it out with actual group of people and with actual smart contracts, and then see if this works, and fine-tune it from there.
I wonder.
I-
Right, go ahead. Yeah.
So I was thinking, like the test requirements on the smart contracts is even if it starts simple, it will get complicated very quickly. It will, if you add a parameter and it multiplies the complexity, exponentially. So then and if we are creating code as or laws as code is law, and it's all machine readable, machine interpretable, I guess it's a good job for AI to stress test all our governance systems to try and come up with, we train an AI to as a bad actor to try and coerce and co-opt governance systems, and then that becomes part of the rigorous, pre-launch testing of any of these smart contract systems. And addition of a new parameter, we've got that sort of that AI trained up in the wings to try and bring us down. And I'm trying.
That sounds like the beginning of a bad movie.
Yeah. Yeah, we just have to remember to try and keep it in the box, otherwise it all goes wrong. But because the sort of efforts around all this is to try and avoid having to empower individuals or create a legal system within the blockchain space, that we don't want to have to pay for policemen and military and that sort of, yeah. So avoiding that by any means necessary is by reducing the severity of bad actors' ability to co-opt the system. But it's all a scale, because ultimately we need liberty and the ability for people to act, that permissionless base to come in. So yeah, that all this sort of thinking is triggered by what you were saying about, you're not a maximalist on the zero knowledge proof, strict identity systems. And yeah, I would love that to be the case as well. But yeah, I don't know if I know whether one way or another, but everything's possible. So let's start from that position and try and work towards it. But then you've got, the other side of the coin is that, you need so few pieces of information to identify an individual, even in a swarm. You just need a few data points, and suddenly you've narrowed it down 99%. And then it's just a case of going through the remaining, no matter how large the system is, it's quite easy to identify someone. So if you are using the enforcement approach, then it is, it's difficult to be a criminal. But we're talking about much lower risk decisions, or, potentially lower risk decisions. We don't want the bad thing to happen before we go after, then let's go after them. We're trying to keep people anonymous, able to act without risking the whole affair. Yeah, and I think this sort of thinking around using social pressure, using networks, trust networks to control and appeal against bad decisions, or vastly damaging or vastly changing decisions, is a really good approach. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, you really listened to what I said, and it's valid, your concern. I would say, like, one reason I also like this like path of appealability through, like, for example, arbitration or things like that you lift it out to someone else, is because it actually like really opens the path for Cardano to be like a network state, where you are citizen on a blockchain, and where you actually create law that's valid, because there's plenty of examples in the history of nations where actually like arbitration is accepted by nations. Like, examples are in indigenous people who have their own rules that's accepted by the rest of the nations, and over time that means that they actually get acceptance and they create their own legal systems inside the blockchain. And I could easily see a future where Cardano will be accepted by nations in how we choose to do this arbitration and choose to do this appealability of smart contracts. But yeah, it gets complex very fast the moment you open up for mutations of something in a smart contract. I think for the foreseeable future, maybe the next 5 years, like, likely it's going to be simpler than that. It's going to be like filtering functions. Like, we'll have like sort of guardrails where a smart contract checks a governance action, or nope, you can't do that, or yes, you can do that, and we upgrade this filter based on what we see if it works in like fairly limited scope still, and we can see it's safe and we can appeal it and change it. And maybe we'll experiment with smaller treasuries for this. I don't recommend we do this for like major things like the protocol parameter changes or whatever. Like, it's way too early and it's way too new concept. We need to understand this much better before we do that.
Yeah, I really like the idea of starting small as well. So having, because big governance is a problem, or big government is a problem. So small governance, local practices and routines and rituals and traditions are important because it affects the people within the smaller communities. And I think, yeah, that would be the ideal place to start with things like something like composable smart contracts, like we have with DAOs. The number in a DAO can be small to medium, not to huge, but if we've got them being tested out in small environments, it seems like a better, the better ideal place to start, not necessarily jumping in with protocol parameters.
Yeah, I sort of see it like a DAO version too, where you, instead of getting this like terrible hacks and splits, you actually have a ways to remedy before you get to that point with this appealability of the smart contracts. So yeah, absolutely, that's the perfect place for it. And that's why I love to come here to Gimbalabs discussions, because you're that type of group of people who could be at the forefront of doing this. Maybe in 5 to 10 years, we are at the point where we know this process better and can start to implement it in larger systems of governance on Cardano.
Yeah, I love the DAO tools sets that are coming up, and it makes it very easy to form a DAO, and it can be small and it can be almost be have a shelf life that's a short period of time as well, and that diminishes the risk of bad decision makers coming in and corrupting it, because it's a lower number of people involved. And I think that with the tools increasing and access to them increasing, then the DAO hack was so big because there was no alternative. It was the first of its kind. The more granular we get, the more spread out, with the more de-risk is apparent.
Yeah.
Okay.
Like if you go to the extreme and you say that everybody has their own DAO, like a DAO of one, then the governance problem doesn't matter, because you're just doing governance for your own structure, and then you can have a way for them to interoperate with each other, where you can redirect funds to other things that you're interested in. That's sort of my perspective on it.
That's a great take. So like you can see it like as a scale, and the more you are dependent on other people and the more resources are locked in, the more you might have this need for this appealability, because the significance of it on the whole ecosystem could be larger as well. Yeah, but of course there's many ways to remedy this situation with resources locked in. That's one reason why I think of appealability, but the other one is, as I started with, is like this concept of harmonizing the code and the law for the social contract, because we are doing this, like we are making a social contract now, we are writing a constitution for Cardano. That's a contract between all of us, and we kind of need that to harmonize with whatever we put on the blockchain itself, because if not, then that will create a lot of conflict if those two don't align. I come from Norway myself, and we have this EU law that we need to also be in compliance with, even we're outside of EU, but we sort of inside. And we have this concept in our legal theory that we harmonize EU law and our own national law. And you could think of it the same way with blockchain versus social law as well. And there's some sorry.
Yeah, there's the minimum set of things that we need to all agree on, like making sure that Cardano keeps working, like just as a whole. But I think that you get more opportunities for experimentation in different sort of governance structures if you have a way to like do things at the smallest level, and where each person can form their own ideas of how to do something, and then maybe people can opt into how they deal with situations, and then you get concurrent experiments going on in different parts of the ecosystem, and you can see what works better than what else.
100% agree. I would say it like this, like some things in Cardano is maybe universal, that's for everyone. Some things might be, for example, local to layer 2 or a group of people who are experimenting. We need to think careful about like what should be universal citizen rights and duties, that's for all of Cardano, and then how can we open up for experimentation on as much as possible and have different rule sets and have different approaches to it. Because that's sort of the dilemma with constitutions, is they are trying to make like a stable rule set, and the theory is that if people know the rules of the game, then it's easier to create economic activity and it's easier to forecast what will happen, but also at the same time create like invention and progress by opening up to amendments or changes to constitutions. And I see it this way, like we should have a few universal things that's for everyone. For example, I think everyone agreed that you should not transactions should be free and should not be blocked by anyone on the blockchain itself. The moment you do that, then that starts to create a lot of problems. And having that playing rules makes it safe for everyone to experiment. But maybe on a layer 2 blockchain, you should be allowed to do something that's totally unrelated to transactions. So you should be able to look away from that rule. And the other like more universal rule I think about is like this rule of property rights. Should you be able to slash or take resources from others? On the protocol level of Cardano, I don't think so, because it's so at the core of what Cardano does. And also, if you do that, you open up for actors to force that to happen, like governments or nations. But whatever people agree to in their layer 2 chain or their smart contract, sure, do whatever they want to. But on the main chain itself, that should be a universal duty and right, that you have that property right. You cannot be taken away your ADA by someone else. You have to do it yourself. But yeah, anyways, that's sort of in another area, but it's related. All of this is related. Like how we think about constitution is really as a social contract, and it has to be programmed on the blockchain, so it has to have a smart contract or program side to it as well. The CC will interpret some of it, but imagine if we have 10,000 of governance proposals. How do you deal with that volume? Like you need to have some form of automation or some form of filtering or smart contract to deal with it. Yeah. I love this discussion, by the way. That's why I'm happy to be here. Any other questions or thoughts or?
Yeah, I would like to, there might be many more questions, but it would be great to have your contact info.
Yeah.
So if we have something, we can refer to you later, because I do have a lot of input in the psychology part, but nothing, you know, when I'm online, nothing comes out of my mind. So.
Let me just post my Twitter, so
Super.
please reach out to me there.
Yeah, we really appreciate you coming, because we love these conversations too. I mean, it's not stupid to say it's still early. I mean, there's still so many problems. There's so many possibilities, but we have some problems to think about, you know, so many potential problems that have to be thought about. So
and I'm humble about, like, I'm thinking about these things. Like, it's so important to test these things out in live experiments and trying it out. So that's why I really want to reach out to groups like Gimbalabs, because you guys are making it. So I love to be a thinker and see how thing develops, but I also love to follow progress of someone actually implementing. So please, if you guys are doing something related to this, like, I would love to see more and understand more and be a sparring partner for developing this, because I think it's part of the key of Cardano governance. Is like we need to lead the way on governance. I think Cardano is really at the forefront of this, and I call it the concept of, like, Cardano is the people's chain. It's sort of like this harmony between the human layer and the programmable or compute layer itself. And I don't think other blockchain does it that well. So let's keep experimenting. Let's keep pushing each other, and let's keep evolving governance, both off chain and on chain.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like we know so many people in Cardano and just different parts of the world and different parts of the community of different types of communities actually doing things, you know, and I've looked around on other blockchains and I don't see that happening here. So I think we have the opportunity collectively to actually just leapfrog so many issues for other people who could do the same thing. They just don't have the people involved to even understand these kinds of problems. So I think it's a great opportunity.
Yeah, I'm not a Cardano maximalist. I love for us to lead the way and for others to learn from us and for the whole blockchain to develop. And I believe Polkadot is doing great stuff on governance as well, and we can probably learn a lot from them. SingularityNet, I know, are doing super cool stuff on reputation systems. So I'm not naive that we are leading in everything, but I really do believe that this tri-party system with the SIP 694 and this, like, harmony between what we're doing in social contract and what's on the chain, this is unprecedented, and we are really leading the way in this in Cardano. So we need to keep evolving that.
Well, I know you said you kind of needed to go move on someplace else. I just want to say thank you again for myself.
Yeah. If I can excuse myself now, then I really appreciated the talk, and please reach out to me if there's anything. And yeah, let's talk again another time.
Sounds great. Thank you.
Thanks a lot for coming.
Thanks
a lot, great conversation. And
comments.
thanks a lot to all of you for attending this session. And see you soon. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Take care, guys.
Thanks, Eystein.
Bye.